Okay guys, so today we have a surprise lesson. We're going to do a group teach with Miss Polly and Miss Brown. So I'm going to start, and we are going to do an introduction to World War II and the Holocaust, and we're going to learn a little bit about Anne Frank. So a little bit of background. Before the war, Hitler became head of the Nazi Party in 1921 and German Chancellor in 1933. Also, he was the dictator, is what he was known as. So Anne Frank was born in Frankfurt, Germany on June 12, 1929. Her family was Jewish. The war began when Germany attacked Poland on September 1st, 1939. Once the war began, many anti-Jewish laws were passed. Some of those laws were they must wear yellow stars on their clothes. They have a curfew, so they can't stay out just till whenever they want to. They're not allowed to visit Christians, and they can only go to Jewish schools. They were banned from public places, and there were many other laws too. So, what was going on during this time? So, in World War II started in 1939. There were the Axis powers and the Allied powers. So, the Axis powers were Germany, Italy, and Japan. And the Allied powers were France, Great Britain, the US, and the Soviet Union. Hitler was the dictator of Germany, and he started the Nazi Party. So a dictator is a ruler that rules with total power over a country. Nazis were extreme racists and anti-Semitic, and Hitler believed the German race to be superior and that Jewish people were inferior. So he thought the Germans were a lot better than the Jewish people. So he spread these views throughout Germany and the Nazi Party. Anti-Semitic means hostile to or prejudiced against Jewish people. And racist is someone who is prejudiced against people based on their race. So down here is the Star of David, and the Jewish people were forced to put these on their clothes to show that they were Jewish. And this is the Nazi symbol known as the swastika. So, background information for the Holocaust. Due to these awful and hateful beliefs being spread, in 1941 the Holocaust began. The Holocaust was a mass genocide of Jewish and other people considered to be inferior to the German race. So, inferior again means they think less of them. So, a genocide is a killing of a large number of people, usually a particular group of people, in an attempt to get rid of them all. So during the Holocaust, the Jewish people and others that the Nazis considered to be inferior were put into internment camps or death camps that were also known as concentration camps. Go ahead. And this is one of the bigger concentration camps. This was Camp Auschwitz, and this was the largest concentration camp. It's estimated about 1.3 million people went through this camp, and almost 1,000 camps were established during the Holocaust. So more background on the Holocaust. In these death camps, the people were put to work, had their heads shaved, they were starved, given tattoos of numbers that were their new form of identification, and they were brutally beaten and abused and killed. So when they came in, they had the tattoos on their arms. They were like tattooed on their arm, and it didn't matter if they were a man, woman, or child. They were all shaven and stripped of their clothing. They were given new clothing, and oftentimes they were split up from their families. They wouldn't stay with their families. So to avoid these camps, many hid and fled. Not all Germans agreed with Hitler and the Nazi way of thinking. They did their best to help their Jewish friends, and around 2.7 million people were killed in the camps. On May 8, 1945, the Holocaust ended, and on September 2nd, 1945, the war ended. And it ended because Hitler had died in April, and so it ended in May. So the Allies freed the prisoners and fed them and gave them medical attention. And when they came into the camps, they took the people out, and they were so skinny and starved that their friends came in and they helped them and fed them and gave them clothing, because a lot of them didn't even have clothing. So it was rough. So now we are going to go to Miss Brown, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about Anne Frank.
Hi, I'm Miss Brown. So you may be wondering, why are we learning history in English today? So it's because you need to know this, because you're going to be reading the diary of Anne Frank. You kind of need to know the history of who she was and what happened. As you read the diary of Anne Frank, you'll see her submissions and what she said each day, her thoughts and feelings. And so it's important to know the history behind that. So who was Anne Frank? She was a young Jewish girl that was about your age. She was about 10 years old. She was alive during the Holocaust with her family. In 1933, her family moved to the Netherlands to get away from the anti-Semitic laws. And in 1940, the Netherlands ended up surrendering to the Germans and the laws that moved there. On July 6, 1942, Anne and her family went into hiding in the secret annex, and that's something that we'll talk a little bit more about. They were joined by another family of 3, and then a Jewish dentist. So that's a family of 3, another family of 3, and then a dentist. So that was 7 people, 8 people, 8 people. And the annex was hidden by a bookcase. Anne received her diary about a month before she went into hiding for her 13th birthday. So what is an annex? You may be wondering. It's an adjoining part to a building with an extra space. So this is a picture of the bookcase where the annex was located behind. It was in the upstairs part of this warehouse. This was a building that was owned by Anne Frank's dad, Otto. So he owned this building, and the upstairs portion behind this bookcase was the annex where they were all hidden for those couple of years. So who all was involved in this? There were 8 people that were hiding. Okay, so earlier I said there was a family of 3. Messed that up. There was actually a family of 4, and then a family of 3, and then the dentist. So we have Edith and Otto Frank. That was Anne Frank's mother and father, and then her sister Margot. In the next family, it was the Van Pels. You had the mom, dad, and then the son Peter. And then we have the dentist that was in there as well, Fritz Pfeiffer. So the people were hiding in the annex the people that were hiding were those in the annex behind that bookcase. The helpers were all friends and employees of Anne's father, Otto. These are all of the helpers here. They worked for Otto, and they helped the families to hide. So Anne refers to the Van Pels in her diary that you're going to read as the Van Dans, and they arrive not too long after her and her family get into the annex. So she refers to Fritz, who is the dentist, as Dussel. So life in the annex. Can you imagine being stuck in a room with 7 other people for 2 whole years in hiding? It was about 450 square feet, which is really not much bigger than this classroom. Like I said, with 8 other people, all day, every day. During the day, they had to remain quiet because in order not to be heard by anyone below them in the warehouse who were shopping and buying things, they had to be quiet so that they wouldn't be discovered. So the building actually belonged to Anne's father, like we said, Otto. So while they were up in the annex hiding, they experienced many bombings to where they were just trapped in the annex. They couldn't come down. So there was bombings going around. There were bombings happening all around them. They were just stuck up there. August 4th, 1944, the annex was discovered. So the helpers were arrested, and the ones in hiding were sent to internment camps. And in internment camps, that is kind of like the concentration camps that Miss Huffman showed you a picture of before a little bit ago. So in these camps, they were tortured, like she said, and beaten. This is a picture of the actual writing in Anne Frank's diary. It says, "Dear Kitty," and that's in German. So Kitty, she was one of Anne's imaginary friends. She had several imaginary friends. And as you can imagine, she just wanted to have fun. She was a kid stuck in that room with those 7 other people all day, every day. she made up these imaginary friends, and Kitty was her favorite. So she had many more, but Kitty was her favorite to correspond and communicate with. She wanted to communicate with someone other than those other 7 people that were with her all the time. She invented several other characters as well. So correspond means just to exchange letters. So that's pretty much what made up Anne Frank's diary. She was writing everything that happened to her and kind of giving it to her imaginary friends. So a diary is a book in which one keeps a daily records of events and experiences. And some of you may have diaries. So now Miss Polly is going to talk to you about some of our upcoming assignments that we're going to do.
All right, guys, so as we are reading the Diary of Anne Frank, we are going to be working in an interactive binder or a journal. So when we read this book, I'm not going to have you guys read this on your own. I'm going to read the book aloud with everybody, or maybe we'll listen to the audio that day. But you're going to follow along with your own copy, and you're going to have your interactive journal. So your interactive journal is where you're going to write your thoughts, your feelings, your questions. And you need to make sure as you're writing all these things that you're including the page number where you got this idea, where you have this question. Make sure you put those page numbers down. And I'm going to give you the instructions to your interactive reading binder/journal. And we're just going to make sure that we keep up with those. And also, we're going to have behind the instructions of the binder, you're going to have your vocabulary sheet that you need to keep up with all important vocabulary terms that have to do with the war, Anne Frank, all of that. Okay, so these are just some examples of what you could say in your interactive journal. So as we're reading along, you could say something like, oh, well, I thought this was interesting because blah, blah, blah. You can say, I wonder, why did Anne write this? I wonder, why did the Van Dams argue in front of everybody? I wonder why they were arguing. You can also, if you don't know what a word means, you can write down that you don't know what that word means. And make sure you put the page number so we can go back and we can look at whatever is around it. And that might be able to help us figure out what it means. So some days at the beginning of class, we're also going to go over any vocabulary terms that you do not know. And we're going to discuss whether those terms are important enough to add to our Anne Frank word wall. On the word wall, we're going to start off with all of the terms that we defined in the PowerPoint today, and then we're going to add some just as we go along. Other things that you can write about, you can say anything that you want about the characters, or something that you didn't like from the day's reading. Maybe you didn't like the way that Anne talked that day. Maybe you thought that she was too negative that day. You can write anything that you like about the characters, or I wouldn't say that these are characters, I would say that these are people, because again, this is a true story. This isn't something that was made up. This is an autobiography. Anne wrote this about her real life. So keep that in mind as we're reading. You can also put any personal connections that you have. So if you relate in some way, you can put that down. Maybe Anne's writing about, oh, well, I have long, dark, curly hair, and I'm just having a really bad hair day. If you relate to that, then you can write that you relate to that. Maybe she's mad at her mom that day and she's writing about her mom. You can say, well, I'm mad at my mom today too, so I relate to that. You can also write down just anything that stands out to you, something that you think is important to the story. Write down anything that you don't understand. If you don't understand what she's talking about, you can write that down, and maybe me and you, we can discuss that together. You can also put down something that you want to know more about. If you're wondering, okay, but why did this happen, or maybe Anne didn't include enough detail and you're just really curious as to what happened there. And there's just so many more things that you can write down. Anything that comes to your mind while you're reading this, just write it down because it is important. These entries, these journals, do not take much thought. You don't have to put too much thought into what you're writing because I just want to know what you're thinking as we are reading this. I'm going to provide you with these instructions. I'm going to read them real quick before we go on to the next slide. So these are going to stay in the front of your binder. Just keep this throughout the year because this is going to guide you each time that we do a reading journal. So what are you going to need? You're going to need your binder, your notebook paper with the holes so you can put it into the binder. You're going to need a pencil and you're going to need whatever book we are reading. So as you read, you will write down your thoughts, feelings, and questions each day. And each day, I need you to write at least 5 sentences of what we read that day. At least 5. You can write more than 5, but no less. So you need to write down what you thought about the day's reading, vocabulary, something you don't understand. Write down what it makes you feel, what any connections, just everything that we just talked about. And make sure to include the page number. I need the page number. All right, we can go ahead and move on. So one last thing before we start reading. Meet Geese, which was one of the women who was helping everybody who was hiding in the annex, found Anne's diary after the annex was discovered and that the people hiding in the annex were taken to concentration camps. And she kept it in her desk, and just so that one day she could return it to Anne. And then the book was published on June 25th in 1947 by Otto Frank, which is Anne's father. So now I'm going to go ahead and read you guys the first entry to Anne's diary. The first entry was on June 12th, 1942. I hope that I will be able to confide everything to you, as I have never been able to confide in anyone. I hope that you will be a great source of comfort and support. And then here's a comment that she added in 1942 in September. She said, so far you truly have been a great source of comfort to me, and so has Kitty, whom now I write to regularly. This way of keeping a diary is much nicer, and now I can hardly wait for those moments when I'm able to write in you. Oh, I am so glad I brought you along. And that is the first entry to Anne's diary. So that's all that we have for you guys today. We're going to continue reading Anne's diary, and each day we're going to keep up with our interactive journals. But to end today, I want you guys to grab a sticky note, and we are going to write down something that you found interesting today. Anything that you heard that you thought was interesting, maybe a question that you have, something you want to know more about, almost like what you would write in your journal. So, and as you leave, I want you to just set it on the turn-in tray, and I'll grab that tomorrow, and we'll talk about any important questions.